Islamic State, right? So there is no real examples of what an Islamic State looks like in today's world. One has the freedom, as I said, to believe or not, and faith remains one's choice. This is a guaranteed choice stipulated in the Quran, as I said, in chapter 2, verse 256. Now, the freedom to form opinion is a unique opportunity in terms of freedom, and the Quran brings it out because those who do not have enough information or data about a particular issue cannot form an educated opinion. One might make an opinion even with a shortage of information, but that would not be helpful in reaching the right decision about certain matters. Islam, therefore, is assertive in its teaching on decision making because faults and mistakes are very costly in the life of individuals and for the community at large. Just like when we entrust our government to make decisions on our behalf when we vote them into office, right? And they become responsible to the constituents, to their voters, if they do not represent the law at its best, right? And when there is a violation and abuse of their post in government, they are held to accountability and to questioning. And they would not even stand a chance of being re-elected at the next election. This is not taking a go at anyone, right? I'm just saying in general. That is why research and precision are essential in providing the necessary data required by rational and intelligent decision makers. Now the big question, democracy and Islam, can they coexist? Because that is $1 million question that have been raised in the media as well. Whether Islam is compatible with democracy or not is a very misleading question. Islam and democracy are two different entities, although the two things cannot be divorced when dealing with politics in the Muslim world itself. Though Islam does not teach either democracy or dictatorship clearly, it is ready to impose an ideological tenets upon Muslims. Evidence has shown that dictatorship is inherent in both Islamic history and text. Early caliphs and later caliphs in numerous Islamic dynasties ruled their people without democratic principles whatsoever. They simply justified their absolute political power with religious dogma, ignoring the voice of the people. So they used Islam in order to promote what? Their seats and power. It is true that the Muslim world has provided more dictators than any other modern society. However, as illustrated above, Islam is compatible with human rights. Islam, like many other religions, is not an old system of belief. Democracy is a new advancement of the modern political system, but each can complement the other, as seen with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the similar document for Islam, which is the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam, created in 1991. The Cairo Declaration protects each individual from arbitrary arrest, torture, maltreatment, or indignity. It clearly does not condone abuse of power and authority, and it does not encourage the abuse of power and authority. The Cairo Declaration was adopted by members of the Organization of the Islamic Conferences, known as OIC, which is composed of eminent Islamic scholars and the Islamic states. All of the countries that are part of the OIC officially adopted the Cairo Declaration in the year 2000. And yet, though both promote human rights, the spirit of the Cairo Declaration is fundamentally different from that of the Universal Declaration, since the former shares the Islamic understanding of human rights in terms of the Quranic and Islamic jurisprudence law. When examined more closely, the Cairo Declaration is not an absolute statement of individual rights, but it is in some ways a list of conditions or obligations that individuals have to conform to under Islamic law. Freedom of expression in the Cairo Declaration, Article number 22, stipulates that the right to express one's opinion freely is contingent on the statement being in conformity with Islamic law. Everyone shall have the right to express his opinion freely in such manner as would be contrary to the principles of Islamic law. Everyone shall have the right to advocate what is right and propagate what is good and warn against what is wrong and evil according to the norms of Islamic law. This, however, can only be practiced within the boundaries of Islamic countries and cannot be imposed on any other society outside the frame of reference. Louis Brandeis, an American lawyer and later Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in America, said this about the need to be able to express oneself freely. Public discussion is a political duty and should be fundamental principle. Order cannot be secured merely through fear of punishment for its infraction, and it is hazardous to discourage thought, hope, and imagination. Then he further said, fear breeds repression, that repression breeds hate, that hate menaces stable government, that the path of safety lies in the opportunity to discuss freely, suppose grievances, and propose remedies, and that the fitting remedy for evil counsel is a good one. Believing in the power of reason as applied through public discussion, they eschew silence coerced by law, argument of force in its worst form, recognizing the occasional tyrannies of governing majorities. They amended the Constitution to that free speech and assembly should be guaranteed. End of the quote. There is little doubt that the idea of human rights can be founded. There is little doubt that the idea of human rights can be founded in biblical sources. The Bible talks about man being created in the image of God, and St. Paul's letters emphasizes the equality of mankind in Christ, but there is more to it than that as well. The natural law tradition goes back to the ancient Greeks through the idea that human beings are endowed with inalienable rights which derive from an unwritten law or a higher principle. Then there is the Protestant Reformation movement, which asserted individual conscience as the foundation for an authentic faith. The English common law and its concern with inheritable rights is also another noted source for the ideal of human rights. The privileging of the individual over the collective is a common theme in these traditions of human rights, and it underpins the Universal Declaration. Its preamble is replete with words such as inalienable and inherent. The French Revolution's Declaration of the Rights of Man, the Magna Carta, Christian theology, and the US Constitution and Bill of Rights have all been utilized as well as sources for modern human rights. So in a sense, human rights are indeed a product of human decency and human tradition. Human rights and their universal application are rightly seen as a defining challenge to the principles of Islam and civilization. The issue is now highly politicized, especially with the rise of Islamic phobia all over the world, with the imposition of the so-called misuse of the word Sharia and the war on terror, which wittingly or otherwise has conflated the notion of Islam with violence in the minds of millions of people. So much so that remarks such as not all terrorists are Muslims, but not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. So what are you trying to say? Right? What are you trying to say? Human rights have become an either-or issue. Either Islam accepts the universality of the rights embodied in the UN Declaration and subordinates its own ethical foundation to it, or it opts out and charts its own way of formalizing human rights in Islam. Although the authors of the Cairo Declaration may not have realized it at the time, the formulation used in the document was very much derived from modern preconceptions garbed in the language of so-called Islamic law. Rights in Islam had previously been formulated in terms of duties and obligations of people to each other, to those in authority over them, to those subordinate to them, and above all to God Himself. As indicated in the Cairo Declaration, whatever rights human beings have are the outcome of individuals and societies fulfilling their duties and responsibilities to one another. There are few rights which are explicitly recognized as such in the Quran. It establishes, for example, parental rights over children, but most rights are in the nature of obligations. The rights of God over humanity are met through acts of worship and devotion. The rights to work exist because human beings have a duty to work and strive to improve their lot and their worldly affairs. The right to free expression exists because humanity has a duty to speak the truth and for its fulfillment. Even in matters which are not on the surface contentious, such as the right to justice, the right arises in consequences of the fact that others, such as the state, the judiciary, or those in power, have not fulfilled their duty to provide or dispense justice fairly. Having said that, about the Cairo Declaration, we also find contradictions in its very sense that it decries that declaration. It decries, it cries out genocides, but several of the OIC members countries themselves have massacred and terrorized their own population and people. How contradictory is that? To bring out a charter and then go against your own very charter that you are having as a declaration of human rights. Article 3 of the Cairo Declaration, which sets the principle of warfare, has been flagrantly ignored in most of the wars involving OIC members countries. For example, in the Somalian, Syrian, and Afghan civil wars, and in the south of Sudan. All has been ignored. Articles dealing with torture and the inviolability of the individual are routinely ignored when Muslim states feel under threat. The indiscriminate slaughter of civilians by the state security apparatus in Gambia in April 2000, resulting in the massacre of students, is another case in point, as are the measures deployed by the Egyptian government against anyone that speaks against the government itself, whether you are an Islamist or whether you are someone who's asking for reform in the country. Article 20 bans torture and arrest without due cause and process, but torture and abuse of prisoners are common practice in the authoritarian states of the OIC and their embassies these days as well. Right? And their embassies, right? Now it's a state of soul, whether it's electric or manual, I don't know, and I don't want to make a joke of it because it's really serious what happened in that embassy. All these states of the OIC members, which includes nearly all the Arab countries and the sub-Saharan Muslim countries, Article 6 guarantees the dignity of womankind. And we find a country who has been assigned now in the United Nations to head the human rights chair when their women could not drive until a year ago. I don't understand what's going on in this world, seriously. When we talk about human rights and equality, that a state of that magnitude is given a seat to run the human rights chair in the United Nations when their women could not even drive. Now, Article 6 guarantees the dignity of womankind, only to see its stipulation floated by innumerable cases where women have been treated in a degrading and cruel manner on account of local or tribal social system. Article 7 guarantees the rights of children, yet abused, abandoned, and mistreated children, let alone the widespread use of children labor or child labor, are a common feature of some of these OIC member countries. Article 8 guarantees the right to justice. However, Muslim countries have probably some of the worst judicial systems where corrupt judges, overloaded courts, and cumbersome and unthinkable legal system conspire to undermine one of the most Islamic civilization key props, the delivery of fair and speedy justice by incorruptible judges with the real authority. And we have an example of that state. It is the state of where Imam Ali, the cousin of the Prophet, ruled for 4 years. Where he was abused personally against the will of the boss members of his community, while he was giving a Friday speech in his own mosque as a head of state in Kufa. This is a living example of how a Muslim state should run when it actually applies Islam as a principle. That man comes and he delivers his first speech in the mosque of Al-Kufa. It's a huge mosque. If you have the opportunity to visit it, you will visit it. It's a beautiful mosque. It's an open courtyard without a roof, and thank God we don't have New Zealand weather in Kufa, so it doesn't rain every 5 minutes, you know. So it's a fairly dry climate. Anyway, he came and he ascended that pulpit, something similar to that, and he said, I have come to you as a ruler with one upper garment and one lower garment, yani 2 pieces of clothing, and my mule, which I've just left outside the mosque, my means of transport, mule, donkey, whatever. If I leave that post with anything extra, you have a right for persecuting me. That's what makes a head of state a head of state, right? He says, you have the right to prosecute me if you see me leaving, and eventually he was killed while praying. Number 1 example. Number 2 example of a head of state, a true Muslim state, is that one of his oppositions, every government has oppositions, right? That's why we have partisans and we have, you know, the opposition leader and the leader in place and so on and so forth. But they argue in a civil way. They may even be at each other's throat in parliament, but then they go out and have coffee, you know, or go to the pub if they want to go to the pub, right? They will do it, no question asked, because the interest and the common interest of both parties is not the individual, but the society and the individual they are serving in society, just like Imam Ali was. So they come to him and says, there is a person who has already built himself a similar podium like yours. So he built himself a pulpit. He said, yes, and what is he doing with it? He said, he's giving a speech while you are giving a speech. You know, Friday is like when the parliament sits. It's like a common gathering for the Muslims where the leader comes and speaks about the affairs of Muslims. So while that head of state, Ali ibn Abi Talib, cousin of the Prophet, was giving his address, this man put a podium and started negating what he is saying. So they said, should we silence him? Should we silence him? He said, what is he saying? He said, he's attacking you and your policies. He said, as long as he's attacking me and my policies and he's not going against the interest of the state, let him speak what he wants. He has a right to it. He has a right to it. Let him speak. And if you want to check what mine's saying, his name is Al-Ash'ath ibn Qais. Google him. You will find his name and you will find the story authenticated and documented in Muslim books. That is the kind of government we want. And that's the kind of freedom we are actually advocating for. The list goes on. Nearly every aspect of the Cairo Declaration is discounted in practice, and there is no effective mechanism, either governmental or one generated by civil society networks, to monitor and ensure compliance with its terms. Islam in and of itself not only respects but also demands freedom of expression and speech. The Quranic injunction to enjoy the good and shun the evil is impossible to act upon if human beings are not allowed to speak freely and act freely. In an erudite and comprehensive work, Freedom of Expression in Islam, by the Afghan scholar Muhammad Hashim Kamali, sets out specific principles from which an entire doctrine of freedom of speech can be derived from. So does Ayatollah Mutahhari in a number of his amazing books on the subject. These principles are derived from the fact that many actions which are deemed praiseworthy in Islam can only be undertaken if one has the ability to express himself freely. These include the proffering of sincere advice, the need to consult, personal reasoning, the freedom to criticize, the freedom to express an opinion, the freedom of association, and the freedom of religion. These rights are not obsolete, they are constrained both morally and legally. The moral constraints of freedom of expression are found in all the great religions. They are built in safeguarding that which prevents injustice, abuse, and strife. And yet Islamic literature is full of irreverent and satirical poets who caricatured rulers and the high and the mighty, and they were not dealt with in any manner other than in a manner of respect and justice. Speech or actions encourages sedition and conspiracy against legally constituted authority is not acceptable. It would be no different from sanctioning those who conspire to overturn or undermine the legal order in any democratic state under the notion of treason. And yet, even where these are not the intent, the modern Muslim state had generally ignored the wide latitude given in Islam to exercise freedom of expression. But this has more to do with the structure of authoritarian states and government than with Islam as such and its followers. Most Muslim governments attain power in a way that Islamic law itself would condemn, such as military coup d'etat or assassinations and killings. Most of the world sees Muslims and Muslim rulers who flagrantly violate universal standard of human rights and freedom, but does not pause to consider whether those violations are in any way allowed, tolerated, or condoned by Islam itself. It is automatically, unfortunately, assumed that because they are perpetrated by Muslim dictators, then they must have the sanction of religion in whose name these violations are often committed or justified. But those who denigrate Islam's commitment to freedom of expression, on the other hand, appeal to have a strong case in the very special and limited issue of the Islamic position on blasphemy. Here I must pause and say that the law of blasphemy has been so much abused like no other law in Islam. And the nature of the abuse stems entirely from love for power by leaders who had no right to rule over the Muslim world, and the only way to do so was through the fabrication of this law. When we examine the Quran states in regard to that law, what does it say? And this is the verse, and I quote 4:137, and I will conclude and end my speech because I've taken much more than your valuable time. God says, indeed, those who believed, then disbelieved. And they left their religion. Then they believed. They came back into religion. Then they disbelieved. So they were going in and out. In and out. One day they believe, the next day don't believe. The next day believe, the next day disbelieve. And then increase in disbelief. So at the end they decided, that's it, I don't want to be a believer anymore. In disbelief, never will God forgive them, nor will He guide them to a way. That's the conclusion of the verse. There is no talk of persecution, no talk of punishment, no talk of killing, no talk of torture, no talk of abuse. Right? What did the rulers say in that regard? Because these people acted as a way to undermine the authority of the government, they said kill them. By virtue of that verse. But that verse does not constitute a law. That verse is merely bringing to your attention that when you form a state, there will be people who will go in and out of the state by virtue of treason and not about disbelief or a question of faith. It has nothing to do with faith at all. It's about undermining the authority of the government, the legitimate government, the elected government, the constituted government. So you need to be aware of what they are doing. But it does not say kill them, right? But unfortunately, it has been misused. Anyone now, for example, in Pakistan, who wants to put someone in prison, he will fabricate what? The notion of blasphemy or renegade. And that person will not see the light after that, right? Will not see the light after that because of that particular verse that has been abused in such an entire way. I thank you for your attentiveness. I thank you for your presence. And I hope I have been able, in a way, even in the slightest of way, to shed some light on how Islam views freedom of speech and human rights within the body of the Quran and Islamic law. Wasallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi tayyibin at-tahirin. Have a very good afternoon and a very, happy weekend, or whatever is left of it, because we took half of your day anyway. But hopefully, God willing, as we say, inshallah, you will have a wonderful week ahead of you. Thank you, bless you, and peace be with you.